Hey guys, welcome back to Clownfish TV. This is Neon. I'm not here with Geeky Sparkles in this video, but she will be back later today. I want to talk about the comic book industry. I want to talk about how it's never been a better time for comics. Really, I'm being completely honest. There has never been a better time for comics. Before we get into the video any further, I want to give a shout out to the sponsor of this video, Opera GX. We've talked about Opera GX before. It is the browser for gamers. It is designed specifically with gamers in mind. We've been using it for the last couple of months. We love it. We're going to talk about some more features and then we're going to get you right back into the video. So big thank you to them. Opera GX has integrated social media channels. You can chat and browse at the same time with your social media channels like Facebook Messenger, Telegram, WhatsApp, Twitch, Discord. You can log into Discord and chat directly in the browser. While Opera has a lot of its own extensions, if you would like to use your Chrome extensions, you can do that too. It's actually very easy. Go into addons.opera.com and install the Install Chrome Extensions extension. Man, that's awkward. Install that and you can actually bring your extensions over to Opera. It's really, really cool. If you want to move over from Chrome, you can easily import your bookmarks and settings into Opera GX. It is equipped with an import tool that allows you to quickly import all of your settings from your previous browsers, like browsing history, bookmarks, and cookies. And by using the My Flow feature, you can connect to GX Mobile. It can be connected to the desktop version. Using the Flow feature, you can send files, videos, links, and notes between browsers in a single click. There's also a GX corner on the start page of GX Mobile with a game release calendar. Opera GX gives you the ability to customize animated wallpapers. Look at all these really cool animated wallpapers. Check this out. We're going to add this one to Opera, Genshin Impact. Isn't that cool? It runs smoothly in the background. It doesn't drag on the performance of your PC, and it adds a little flair. Other features available on Opera GX include the ability to add background music. Background music that responds to your browsing. The more active you are, the more intense it gets. That's kind of crazy. Opera GX has its own built-in VPN. Check this out. You can hide your location, control your privacy and security with an integrated browser VPN and ad blocker. It's free and unlimited and very, very helpful. You never can be too careful on the internet, right? We have a special download link for you pinned in the comments section. I'm going to flash it on the screen here. Definitely check out Opera GX, and thank you so much for sponsoring this video. Now we're going to get back into it. The potential that's here now with technology and so many people wanting to make comics and so many different ways to sell comics that we're not locked into the direct market or comic shops anymore. We're not locked into the newsstands. You literally can create and sell comics anywhere and nobody can stop you. There are no more gatekeepers. There were people that tried to position themselves as gatekeepers, and people figured out a way to do an end run around them. And I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about the situation with Frank Miller starting his own independent publishing company with Dan DiDio from DC Comics. I'm actually very excited about this. The comic book industry desperately needs people like Frank Miller. Of course, we've got the usual suspects on Twitter trying to cancel Frank Miller or remind people what an awful person he is because of a comic he did like 10 or 12 years ago. And really, they just try to cancel, anybody that doesn't subscribe to current day politics. And they try to cancel people who are a legitimate threat. Frank Miller coming back full force, getting some other luminaries together with him to start a publishing company with the former head of DC Comics. It could absolutely damage DC Comics. It could absolutely pull people away from DC Comics because DC Comics is a pale imitation of what it used to be, as is Marvel Comics right now. Okay, guys, if you haven't subscribed yet, please do so. We're over 265,000 subs. We do talk about the comic book industry, having worked in and around comics for a number of years and getting ready to go all in on making our own comics again. And it's exciting. People today don't realize how good they have it. When I was trying to break into comics, there was like only one or two ways you could break into comics. And usually it was you would do your sample pages, you would go to conventions and pester editors. And if they like your stuff, they'd give you another tryout and then they would put you on a book. Or you knew somebody or something like that. Or you paid your dues, working on your own self-published book, doing zines. That was the thing back then, but it was a real long shot as to whether or not you could get picked up in comics, right? And it definitely was a longer shot to be successful self-publishing your own stuff. Very few people, made viable livings selling their own comic books. Jeff Smith did for a while with Bone, Cerebus, obviously Dave Sim, and a few others. Ninja Turtles, of course, Ninja Turtles. But for the most part, you were kind of locked into that system. You had to go work for a Marvel or a DC or do your time working for an indie publisher until you could get into Marvel or DC, because that's where the real money was. And now Marvel and DC are broken. They're fundamentally broken. And even with sales being down on Marvel and DC Comics, the comic book industry, comics in general, are doing very well. It's not Marvel and DC stuff. We've talked about this before. It's manga, it's graphic novels, it's independent comics, it's crowdfunding. So many ways to make comic books right now. And, there really has never been a better time to get into comics, because virtually any kind of story you can think about can be told, can be created. If you don't have a comic that you like, if you're not seeing what you like on the shelves, you can do it yourself. And you can sell to consumers directly. And if you can't afford to print a comic, you can put your comic online and build an audience that way. Again, back in the day, if you wanted to do comic books and you wanted to do independent comic books, you would have to save up thousands of dollars to do a print run of your own on your own independent comic book, or, go buy a printing press like the Ninja Turtles guys, they had their own press, and do it that way and try to get your stuff into Diamond or try to get comic shops to carry it on your own. And now it's so easy. It really is. And I have a lot of hope. For the first time in many years, I have a lot of hope for the comic book industry. I don't have a lot of hope for Marvel Comics. I don't have a lot of hope for DC Comics. I put this out today on Twitter, which I have a lot of hope for Twitter too. I haven't had a lot of hope for Twitter in a while, but it's been fun the last couple of days, right? So Doug Ernst put something out there talking about how he doesn't even care enough to read Marvel Comics and comment on Marvel Comics anymore. And he's not wrong. Everything that's been produced by Marvel Comics after 2009, from my own personal point of view, is apocrypha. It's not really canon. Like Marvel Comics, I think, ended in 2009. Everything else after that is Disney's Marvel Comics, and you can treat it as such. You can ignore it. You have that right to ignore it. Canon changes all the time. They reboot stuff all the time. People were asking for my thoughts on the Spider-Man relaunch. I don't give a shit. Spider-Man #1 is out. It's another reboot of Amazing Spider-Man again. And now MJ apparently has kids, spoiler, to some guy, spoiler. I'm sure there's a plot reason for this. I'm sure it's probably going to be like Captain America, where, oh my God, he's Hydra. Oh my God, not really, or he is really, and they undid it, or something. But I don't care. I don't care that Thor's mother is Dark Phoenix or whatever the hell is going on right now. I don't care. It's apocrypha to me. I don't care about what's going on in Marvel and DC Comics. If I talk about them, from a business perspective. Like, what the hell are you doing? You're losing ground to indies. You're losing ground to manga because nobody wants to read the stuff anymore. You've chased off your audience and you haven't really cultivated a new audience. You're not really making comics more accessible for kids, despite them saying for years, hey, we're going to make comics for everybody. No, you're really not. You're making comics for yourself and your friends and people like you, and for Twitter to get fist bumps, and for Hollywood to get your pitches picked up. That's why you're making comic books now. And most people who are working in comics now, in the mainstream, a lot of them, it's basically just a pit stop. It's a stepping stone to Hollywood. They hope. Now with Netflix imploding, I don't know. I don't know how that plan is going to work out for a lot of them. But yeah, I mean, you know, DC, if it wasn't for Batman, they'd be completely screwed at this point. They've changed so many characters for very arbitrary reasons, but you know, DC has not been the same since Dan DiDio got gone. So speaking of which, it's going to take me into this, that Frank Miller is launching an independent publishing company. He's going to have new Sin City stories, Ronin comics in the works. It's actually very exciting. The comics legend behind The Dark Knight Returns and 300 will act as editor-in-chief, while Dan DiDio returns to the world of comics, acting as the company's publisher for the first time since exiting DC in 2020. I do not believe that was his decision. I think he was ousted, and then they had a bunch of activists take over. They had Daniel Cherry III, who lasted 18 months, but the damage has been done. I mean, DC is laughably bad at this point. Every other month, another character is coming out that's never, I mean, there's never been any indication that half these characters were ever LGBTQ. They're just like, hey, by the way, Robin's gay, and Alfred's gay, and Crypto's gay too. Everybody's gay. just because. Anyway, Frank Miller, absolute legend, and Twitter can piss off because they really have it wrong, I think, about, you know, his comic story. And again, you know, the stuff that he's put out there was supposed to shock people. You know, The Dark Knight was supposed to shock people. 300 shocked people. Sin City shocked people. That's, you know, Frank Miller was the poster child for the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund, which advocated for free speech back in the day. Remember the little girl with the bandages on her eyes and yeah. Again, shocking image, but, you know, that's what comics were about in the 80s and 90s. It was about pushing boundaries and advocating for free speech, and now you're not allowed to say a damn thing without getting called out on Twitter. That's okay. Space Daddy's going to change it. So after decades of working for DC, Marvel, and even indie publishers such as Dark Horse, Frank Miller is striking out on his own, launching a publishing banner. Named Frank Miller Presents, the company will have the writer-artist behind The Dark Knight Returns, Sin City, and 300 acting as president and editor-in-chief, with the goal of creating and curating a line of comics that hopes to capture Miller's distinct visual style while also working with a range of talent from comics veterans to rising artists. The company has been quietly in the works for months, if not years, and is coming to the launchpad with several titles, including a new Sin City comic and a return to Ronin, the sci-fi samurai creation Miller wrote and drew prior to Dark Knight. Joining Miller in this new venture is Dan DiDio, who acted as co-publisher of DC from 2010 to 2020 and will now serve as publisher at Frank Miller Presents. Silan Thomas, the CEO of Frank Miller Inc., will serve as COO. Investing in artists in the future of comics has always been my one true passion and creative calling. Miller said in a statement, Dan, Silan, and I couldn't be more proud to be launching Frank Miller Presents, which will serve as fertile ground for storytellers and new creations. Our focus for this publishing company is to cultivate a fellowship of artists and writers to mentor, collaborate, and push forward not only each other, but the art form as well. And there is no pushing the art form forward anymore. It's about pushing the message. You know, and I'm actually excited about this. They're going to talk about, they talk about NFTs. We're going to talk about that too, because this is what, you know, again, there are so many options right now to create comics, right? Young artists today have no concept of how lucky they really are. If you're not making comics, if you're not getting your stuff out there, even if you have a very small audience, it's because you don't want to make comics. You can make comics anywhere. You can post them anywhere. Webtoon has been incredibly successful. Webcomics before Webtoon were successful. We actually made pretty decent money doing webcomics back in the day when the ad rates were pretty good. You know, but I mean, there are ways to make money in comics and work in comics. It doesn't include working for Marvel and DC. If you don't like what's going on at Marvel and DC, and a lot of people don't, at some point you have to realize that, the Marvel and DC that we grew up with, that we grew up reading, no longer exists. It's just not, it's not there anymore. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't recapture the feeling of old school Marvel and DC. It doesn't mean that you can't create new characters in the vein of what you grew up loving. But as far as expecting, Disney Co. and Warner Brothers to give you versions of the characters that you grew up with and remain kind of locked in a moment, it's not going to happen for a number of reasons. And it's time to move on, I think, and just stop expecting the mainstream to be any more than, corporate ancillary merchandise for movies. And, that's basically what comics are now. It's tie-in merch for movies. They're not even really taking the stories from comics so much anymore and turning them into movies, at least not the news stories. I mean, there are a couple here and there, but for the most part, it's just like, Disney and Warner could stop publishing comics tomorrow, and it would have zero effect on their movies, on their TV shows. Most people who watch shows and movies based on comics don't actually read comics anyway. I'm just saying. But yeah, I mean, crowdfunding is incredibly popular now. I mean, you have no idea how lucky you are. I think I priced it in the late 90s when I wanted to self-publish some stuff. And I didn't pull the trigger on it because I didn't have the money, but it was like $5,000 or $6,000 to do a print run of comics back then, on a whim. And I didn't even know if people were going to buy them. And now you can actually kind of test market your ideas. You can put your stuff up on a crowdfunding site, Kickstarter or Indiegogo or whatever the hell else comes out, and see if anybody actually wants to buy your comic before you make your comic. I mean, it's ridiculously easy compared to what it used to be. You have no idea. And there really hasn't been a better time to try to get into comics and make comics. Now, you may sell your comics to a smaller audience, because we don't have people buying comics in the hundreds of thousands very often anymore. If a comic breaks 100,000, gets a story in Bleeding Cool because it's such a rarity. But back in the day, it was very normal for even middle of the road comics to sell 400,000 or 500,000 copies. So you may not have the same size audience, you may not have the same reach, but you definitely have more opportunity than you've ever had to make comics. And it really is the best time, especially with people being so, disenfranchised with Marvel and DC Comics, because you've got a captive audience. You've got so many people that are looking for something different. They don't want to read Marvel and DC comics like they used to. They want manga. They want different kinds of stories. They want different voices. They just want to be entertained. And if you can provide that for them, you've already got a leg up over the competition. You can sell fewer comics and still come out ahead of, taking a job at Marvel or DC. I mean, the page rates now are not good. I know some people get decent page rates, but I know there are a lot of people talking about how their rates are under $100 a page, working for publishers like, IDW and Boom. Depends on the book, but you might actually come out ahead doing an indie project, going through crowdfunding or something else, or profit sharing or something, than you would working for one of these other publishers. It's kind of crazy, the economics of it. And there are people now that do, 1 or 2 comics a year, and they're probably making more money than they made working for Marvel or DC. And they can kind of set their own schedule and all of that. So it's definitely, again, the best possible time. The best possible time to want to make comics. And for readers, it's, Marvel and DC aren't giving it to you. There are so many other people out there that are waiting to give you pure entertainment. Again, whether it's a manga or indies or whatever, you don't have to just buy Marvel. You don't have to buy DC. If you don't want to. I mean, if you want to, fantastic. If you're happy with what they're doing, fantastic. That's fine. A lot of people aren't, and we're seeing it reflected in the numbers. When it's only Batman that's selling, you've got a problem, right? but it's kind of crazy. Now, where I get concerned, and going back to Frank Miller, and I was thinking about this last night, actually, is all the veteran talent that has been left on the table. I guess that sounds bad, but you know what I'm saying? Like, there's so many people out there who worked in comics for so long, who are so skilled, who have been left behind by Marvel and DC. And they're still capable of working. And in many cases, they still want to work in comics. They're just not being called for whatever reason. I know that especially at like Marvel, it's about being fashionable. If you're not fashionable enough, if you're an older dude, you know, white dude in particular, you're probably not getting a lot of phone calls because they think you're out of touch. And the reality is there are so many people out there that would kill to have, you know, a John Byrne, Chris Claremont comic, you know, every month, or a graphic novel once a year or something. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's money being left on the table. And these publishers are so short-sighted that they are leaving a lot of pros behind. And this was going on before all the drama with the quote-unquote wokeness in comics. I mean, I think it was Herb Trimp, I want to say, who was angry that he wasn't getting work in comics and he had to work like a day job somewhere. I know there was another comic author who had a lot of health problems, and they were constantly doing fundraisers for him. And I'm like, that's fantastic. Why isn't anyone hiring him? Why aren't people hiring these veterans who want to work? You know what I'm saying? Like, they want to work, and there are customers out there willing to buy their stuff. There are lots of customers out there willing to buy their stuff. So, you know, what's the problem? And again, that's where politics and nepotism and you know, all this woke bullshit that crept into comics has kind of come into play, where we have people who are bankable not being given work because they want to control the flow of spice. They want you to buy these particular creators' works because they know if they put them up against a Frank Miller or a John Byrne or Chris Claremont or, you know, a Todd McFarlane or whatever, that they're going to come up short. You know, they're going to come up short. And the old school fans, the ones who have right now have more disposable income and who are frankly keeping the direct market functioning, you know, somewhat, they're moving on to other stuff. And these companies, I think, are going to realize too late that they could have been making money all along. They could have made Disney happier these last 5 or 10 years if they had just stayed the course and given people what they wanted, you know, instead of trying to tell them what they should want. So I'm going to wrap this one up. I just think it's really interesting. I think we're going to see more of this. I think we're going to see more veteran comic book creators, you know, venturing out and doing their own thing. And I think that their audiences and their dollars are going to follow them. So I wish Mr. Miller, Mr. DiDio, the best of luck. Going to wrap it up. Please subscribe for more pop culture, news, views, and rants. We'll talk later.